They were laughing in my house, in my kitchen, at my table. She thought I was in Chicago, finalizing a contract. I was parked 2 houses down, gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me to the version of my life that had existed an hour ago. I didn't plan to catch her. I wasn't suspicious. Not really. I just forgot my tablet. That's all. I drove back from the airport annoyed, thinking I'd be late to the meeting. I had no idea that by the time I turned my key in the front door, the man I used to be would vanish. I didn't open the door right away. Something made me stop. A sound. Laughter. Hers. Then his. Low and easy, like he belonged. Like this was normal. I stepped back, instinctively. I looked through the window. That's when I saw them. She touched his wrist as he poured wine. My wife. My Emma. The man across from her was Ryan, my business partner. My best friend since college. We'd built the firm together. Spent a decade trusting each other with contracts, clients, secrets, and apparently, wives. I didn't go inside. Instead, I turned and walked away, got into the car, and drove with my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would punch through my ribs. My mind raced, but I wasn't thinking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove. Later that night, I got a text from Emma. Everything okay? You left early. I stared at the screen, wondering how easily she could lie. I responded with something safe. Flight was delayed. Just landed. Love you. She replied with a heart emoji. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not in a dramatic, fiery way, but like a slow fracture in concrete. You can't always hear it, but you feel the weight shift. Something's no longer holding. I didn't sleep. I made coffee at 3 a.m. and started writing everything down. Dates, conversations, patterns I'd ignored. I wasn't looking for proof. I already had that. I was building something else. A strategy. For 2 weeks, I watched. Quietly. I came home on schedule. Smiled like nothing was wrong. Let her tell me about Pilates and brunch and how Ryan's wife was drifting. I nodded. I listened. I started copying files from our shared server at the office. The ones Ryan thought were protected. You see, I designed our system. He never saw me coming. The first crack in their little fantasy came when I sent Ryan a message from an encrypted account. I know. No name. No details. Just 2 words. He replied in less than a minute. Who is this? Then again, 30 minutes later. If this is about Emma, it's not what you think. Liar. He started acting jumpy at work. I watched him flinch when my voice came around a corner. I took him out for drinks like old times, just to watch the sweat gather at his collar. Emma, meanwhile, became sweeter. She'd kiss my cheek more, ask how my meetings went, like she knew something was fragile and she was trying to hold it. They didn't know it was already broken. A week later, I invited Ryan over for dinner. Emma was surprised. She stammered when I told her, eyes darting like she couldn't decide which excuse to use. I just smiled and said, "It's been too long." Ryan showed up with a bottle of wine. Emma barely touched her food. I poured the drinks, made small talk. Then I asked the question, "So how's Claire?" That was Ryan's wife, the one they both conveniently stopped mentioning. She moved out, he said. I looked at Emma. She dropped her fork. Trouble at home? I asked. Ryan nodded, and Emma stood up suddenly. I'll get dessert. She left the room, and Ryan leaned in like we were still friends. It's not what you think, he said again. That phrase. That pathetic little defense. No, I asked, still smiling. Then I showed him the photo. Just one. Emma in his lap, kissing his neck, on our back porch. The timestamp was from last Thursday, the day she told me she was getting a facial. He went pale. Didn't even try to deny it. You have no idea what you've done, I said, cold and quiet. He opened his mouth to speak, but I stood up. Dinner's over. Emma came back into the room holding a tray of brownies, and I looked her in the eyes for the first time in weeks. Your boyfriend's leaving. Her mouth fell open, and Ryan stumbled to the door, muttering something I didn't hear. When he left, Emma turned to me. You knew? I know everything, I said. And I did. That night, she cried, begged, said it was a mistake, that she still loved me. I listened, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to hear the lies she'd been telling herself. They were useful. I told her we needed time. I wasn't ready to forgive, but maybe, eventually. She moved into the guest room. We played house for a few more weeks. She didn't know I'd already met with a lawyer, or that I'd frozen our shared accounts, or that I'd updated the terms of our company's ownership, terms she and Ryan never bothered to read when they signed. They thought I'd fall apart. They didn't realize I'd start building. And I always build things to last. Emma tried. I'll give her that. She started cooking dinners again, asking about my day. She laughed too hard at my jokes, like a desperate actor in a scene she hadn't rehearsed. She thought smiles and home-cooked meals could fix what she'd shattered. But nothing tastes the same after betrayal, especially when you know the recipe's poisoned. I stayed calm, played my role, gave her hope I never intended to honor. Behind that performance, I built something else, a path she couldn't see but would soon be forced to walk. First, I dealt with Ryan. I requested an emergency board meeting, just the two of us and our legal advisor. Ryan thought we were going to discuss a new client from Atlanta. He showed up trying to act normal, like the man I hadn't watched destroy my marriage. I opened the meeting with 2 documents. The first was a forensic audit, painstakingly assembled by a financial investigator I hired discreetly 6 weeks earlier. It detailed Ryan's misuse of company funds, dinners with Emma listed as client development, a hotel suite booked every other Thursday, even payments to a florist near our office. The second was a revised shareholder agreement, one we'd both signed last year, giving either partner the right to initiate a buyout under conditions of personal misconduct that threaten the company's reputation. "This is blackmail," Ryan said, voice tight. "No," I replied. "It's math. Numbers, dates, your signature. You don't go to jail, but you do get out." He cursed, but I didn't flinch. The advisor sat silently, waiting for Ryan to realize he had no move left. Ryan left the company within 48 hours. No goodbye email. No farewell drinks. Just a quiet exit and a settlement that kept him gagged. Emma didn't ask why his name vanished from the letterhead. Then came the harder part. I'd been married to Emma for 12 years. That kind of connection doesn't break clean. There are photographs, mutual friends, routines built over a decade. Even with the truth between us, she still clung to the version of me I used to be. The man who came home late, kissed her goodnight, and never questioned where she'd been. But I wasn't him anymore. I filed for divorce on a Monday morning. The papers were delivered by courier while she was at yoga. When she came home, I was packing my office. Just that. No boxes in the hallway. No shouting. No drama. Just me, putting things in order. "You can't be serious," she said, holding the envelope like it burned her fingers. "I was serious the day I married you," I answered. "You weren't." She cried again. More this time. Talked about history, connection, our future. Promised to cut ties with Ryan. Too late, obviously. She didn't understand that this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about integrity. Mine. She begged me not to go public. Claimed she'd lose friends, respect. Said people would take sides. I looked her straight in the eye. "They already have. You just haven't heard the verdict yet." She moved in with her sister 2 weeks later. I could have left it there. Divorce finalized, partnership dissolved, my name clean. But I wasn't done. Not because I hated them. Because they needed to understand what they tried to destroy. Ryan resurfaced briefly. I heard through a mutual friend he'd landed a position at a small firm across town. I waited until his first pitch meeting with a potential investor, a group I'd worked with in the past. I didn't sabotage it directly. I just made a call. Told the investor I had concerns about Ryan's ethical compass. Left it vague. Professional. No gossip, no drama. But it was enough. Ryan didn't get the contract. Word started to spread. By the end of the quarter, his new job was gone. Emma, meanwhile, had moved into a temporary apartment. She sent me long messages I never responded to. She said she was working on herself, trying to understand her choices. I didn't need an apology. What I needed, what I demanded, was honesty. And that had expired the day she touched his wrist in my kitchen. A month later, I saw her again. Not planned. I was speaking at a leadership panel downtown. After the event, as I stepped outside, there she was, standing near the sidewalk like she'd been waiting. "I saw the article," she said. "They wrote about your work. Called you visionary." I nodded. "You always were," she added quietly. "I just didn't see it then." There it was. Too late. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "But I don't miss you either. That's the part you don't understand." She flinched, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not victory, just stillness. That night, I walked home. No car, no driver. Just me and the city. I thought about what I'd lost, and what I'd rebuilt. Everything that mattered, my name, my work, my sense of self, was intact. No lie, No betrayal could take that from me now. Because I didn't let the wreckage define me. I redesigned my life like a blueprint, measured, precise, and on my own terms. The strange thing about revenge is that once it's done, really done, it doesn't leave you with what you expected. There's no parade, no applause, just quiet. It's not emptiness, not quite. More like an unfamiliar stillness. Like the silence in a room after the fire alarm stops. That's where I found myself. Divorce finalized. Business reclaimed. Enemies neutralized. My life was mine again. But there was a question that kept circling my mind at night. Now what? I filled the space at first with more work. New projects, new meetings, new deadlines. I told myself I was chasing success, but really, I was just staying busy because slowing down meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering. I avoided people, parties, invitations, anything that required me to pretend I was okay with small talk. Most of my friends had chosen sides during the fallout. Some out of loyalty, others out of discomfort. I didn't blame them. I'd chosen sides too, and I chose myself. Then came Ava. We met at a lecture I almost skipped. She was on the panel. Sharp, clear, no theatrics. She talked about systems, how cities fail not because of bad buildings, but because of failed intent. I'd never heard someone articulate structure as something human. Afterwards, she asked me a question no one else had asked in months. Do you believe people change? I didn't answer. Not at first, but I found myself wanting to. We had coffee the next week. Then drinks. Then nothing for a while. No fast track. No scripts. Just conversation that didn't feel like a transaction. She didn't ask about Emma or the headlines. When I told her, eventually, she didn't flinch. Pain doesn't scare me, she said. What people do with it does. Ava wasn't a replacement. She didn't come into my life to fix anything. She just made me realize I'd been living inside walls I built myself. Walls meant to protect. But they were also keeping me from anything real. She didn't push. She didn't hover. She just showed up. And after everything I'd been through, that meant more than I expected. Meanwhile, Ryan vanished from the city. I heard rumors. One said he'd moved to Arizona to start over. Another said his marriage to Claire had collapsed after he admitted everything. I didn't follow up. Let ghosts haunt someone else. Emma reached out once more. A letter this time. Handwritten. Apologizing again. Saying she understood now what she'd lost. That she hoped, someday we could speak. I didn't respond. Forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned. And even then, it doesn't mean reunion. It just means I'm not carrying it anymore. Ava and I started building something slowly. No declarations. Just habits. Late dinners. Walks where no one had to fill the silence. Debates that didn't end with slammed doors. One night she said, "You're still angry. But not at them. At yourself." She was right. Because somewhere deep down, I knew I'd ignored signs long before the betrayal. I'd allowed myself to believe silence meant safety. That if I just worked hard enough, provided enough, stayed the course, love would stay. But love isn't loyalty by default. It's not earned through absence. It requires presence. I'd been physically there, but emotionally missing. And when you vanish enough times, someone eventually stops looking for you. That didn't justify what Emma did, but it made me face my part in it. That was the final piece of this reconstruction. Not revenge. Accountability. A year passed. The firm expanded. I mentored younger architects. I started teaching part-time. For the first time, I wasn't chasing legacy. I was living in it. Ava and I didn't move in together. We didn't rush titles. But one night, she handed me a folder. Inside was a proposal for a public design initiative, urban renewal for neglected spaces. At the bottom, it read, "Project lead you." I asked why. She shrugged. Because you don't just build buildings. You rebuild people, even when they've collapsed. That night, I realized something else. I hadn't rebuilt my life because I was broken. I'd rebuild it because I deserved something stronger than what I had allowed myself to accept. The fire that burned my old life wasn't the end. It was the test. And I passed. Not because I got revenge, but because I came out the other side honest, awake, and unwilling to settle for anything less than respect, peace, and clarity. You don't always get justice the way you imagined it. Sometimes it's quieter, slower, more personal. But when it finally arrives, it lasts. It was a Tuesday when I saw his name again. Ryan Carter. In an email subject line I wasn't supposed to see. One of my junior partners had forwarded a client inquiry to me by mistake. I almost deleted it. Then I saw the sender. A real estate group in Austin had just partnered with a new design consultant, Ryan. The same man who used to sit beside me in pitch meetings and later betrayed me in ways I still felt in my bones. He was back, not in my city, but close enough. Trying again, reinventing, rebranding. The email wasn't about me. It didn't accuse, didn't threaten, didn't even mention the past. But it hit harder than any confrontation ever could. Because I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. But I still had the blueprint of my old rage filed away, like plans for a structure I hoped I'd never need again. I told Ava about it that night. We were reviewing plans for the community design project she'd invited me into. It was the kind of work I used to dream about, but never made time for. I slid my phone across the table. She read the email and said, "Are you going to respond?" "No." "Are you tempted to interfere?" "No," I said again. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something tighten in my chest. She nodded. "That's not revenge. That's memory." Still, something lingered. Not vengeance, curiosity. Had he changed? Learned anything? Or was he just hoping enough time had passed that people would forget? I didn't look him up. I didn't reach out. But I started watching myself more closely. Because I knew if I didn't stay intentional, old habits would pull me back in. The desire to prove a point. To remind the world who he really was. To remind me. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. Not from Ryan. From Claire, his ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in years. But she'd heard about my public design work. Said she admired the shift. Then came the part that made me stop reading. "I thought you should know. Ryan's been trying to reconnect with our daughter. She's 20 now. Smart. Skeptical. But I don't think he's changed. And I worry." She didn't ask for help. She didn't accuse. She just shared. But it gave me the only thing more dangerous than anger. Moral clarity. I booked a trip to Austin. Didn't tell Ava. Didn't tell my firm. I told myself I just needed to see for myself. Make peace with the fact that he was still out there. Breathing. Building. The day I arrived, I walked by the development he'd been consulting on. It was clean, polished, safe. Forgettable. Like a man trying to erase everything that had come before. I waited across the street until I saw him step out of the building. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not in size, in presence. The charisma that once wrapped people in false safety was gone. Replaced by a cautious, subdued energy. He didn't see me, and I didn't call out. Because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. He wasn't the test. I was. I flew home that same evening. Ava met me at the door. She didn't ask where I'd gone. Just looked at me like she already knew. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. I didn't need to do anything. I just needed to see that I didn't want to. She nodded. "Then you've really moved on." Closure doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like a silent decision, made in the space between one breath and the next. I went to see my lawyer the next day and asked him to draft a letter. Not for Ryan. For Claire's daughter. Simple. Clear. Not dramatic. Just, if you ever need to talk to someone who knows what manipulation looks like in a suit and a smile, I'm here. I never got a reply, but I didn't need one. Months passed. The design initiative Ava and I led received national funding. I gave a keynote about sustainable urban ethics, how cities, like people, require honest foundations to thrive. I spoke without notes, without anger, without fear of ghosts, because I'd built something stronger than revenge. A life that didn't need enemies to feel real. A relationship that didn't need rescuing. A self I finally respected. I don't think of Ryan much anymore. And when I do, I don't see the man who wrecked my marriage. I see a test I passed. Not by winning, but by refusing to play the same game again. 5 years ago, I wanted justice. 4 years ago, I wanted control. 3 years ago, I wanted peace. Now, I want clarity. Not just for me, but for what I leave behind. It started when Ava asked me a simple question. What would you build if no one ever knew your name? I didn't answer at first. I sat with it for weeks. I thought about the awards on my wall. The articles. The praise I once craved like oxygen. All earned. All real. But none of it held up in the silence of a life you actually want to live. So I did what I always do when a blueprint isn't working. I redrafted. I sold my share in the firm last year. Kept a silent role. No desk. No decisions. Just trust. The younger partners were ready. It was time to stop architecting my image and start investing in something quieter, but heavier. I launched a foundation. It wasn't splashy. No press release. No interviews. just targeted grants to support young designers from underserved communities, people who didn't grow up knowing anyone in the room where decisions are made. I didn't name it after myself. I called it Second Draft, because we don't always get it right the first time. I certainly didn't. Claire's daughter, Jordan, reached out last fall. It was short. You were right. He hasn't changed. But I have. She attached a photo of her college thesis on architectural ethics. I sat there staring at it, not because of pride, but because of the echo. He hasn't changed. But I have. That was the theme of everything I'd survived, everything I'd built. People kept waiting for the story to circle back, for Ryan to come back swinging, for Emma to ask for another chance, for some final twist to prove the cycle isn't over. But stories don't always spiral. Sometimes they end because someone refuses to repeat the pattern. That someone was me. Emma moved to Portland a year ago. We haven't spoken in 2. I heard from a mutual friend that she remarried. I felt nothing. Not numbness. Just detachment. I no longer tied her to my narrative. She was a chapter. A turning point. Nothing more. Ava and I still live separately, by choice. We've carved out a rhythm that doesn't require fusion to be full. She once told me, love isn't a merger. It's a shared direction. I never understood that kind of calm before her. One morning, I stood in front of a classroom full of students. They asked the usual questions: how to win clients, how to pitch, how to protect ideas. But one young woman in the back raised her hand and said, "What's the one thing you regret?" The room went quiet. I didn't dodge it. I regret staying quiet when I knew something was wrong, I said. In my work, in my marriage, in myself. They waited for the rest. The advice, the takeaway. So I gave it to them. You don't lose yourself all at once. You let pieces go, one missed conversation, one avoided decision, one more day of pretending you're fine. Stop the pattern early, or you'll wake up trying to rebuild something you barely remember how to hold. I watched heads nod. Some understood. Some would later. Last month, we broke ground on our biggest community project yet. A full redesign of a forgotten block in a part of the city no one cared about 10 years ago. Now, it's a canvas. The city asked if I wanted to speak at the ribbon cutting. I said no. I gave the mic to a young architect on our team who grew up 3 streets away from that block. It was her story to tell. I just gave her the foundation. After the event, a man in his 40s approached me, said he'd been following my work, that he remembered when I disappeared from the spotlight and figured I'd left the game entirely. You could have gone nuclear on everyone, he said. Instead, you built something new. That's rare. I shrugged. It's easier to burn it all down. Harder to live with the smoke. He smiled, shook my hand, and left. Later that evening, Ava and I sat watching the sun drop behind the skyline we both helped shape. Do you miss the fight? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted, but only when I forget what it cost. She nodded. You never struck to hurt. You struck to wake something up. I struck to survive, I said, but I stayed to build. I don't know what people remember me for when I'm gone. I used to think legacy was about buildings, awards, names on glass. Now I know better. Legacy is who remembers how you made them feel when they thought no one saw them. It's who stands up a little taller because you did. It's what survives when your anger doesn't. This story doesn't end with revenge. It ends with resilience. And that, I've learned, is the rarest thing of all. It wasn't a big moment. No stage. No flashbulbs. Just an email from a city official. They wanted to name the new community center after me. At first, I stared at the screen in silence. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wasn't sure it fit. I'd spent years stepping away from the spotlight, rebuilding behind the scenes, giving space for others to lead. Putting my name on a building felt like stepping backward into something I'd outgrown. I called Ava. She listened, then said, "You didn't build the center to be seen. But if your name on the wall reminds one kid that reinvention is possible, that might be worth it." I told them yes, but asked for one condition. No plaque, no speech, just a wall inside with a single sentence. Nothing strong is built in silence, but it always begins there. 2 weeks later, I walked the center before it opened. There was a teenager sketching blueprints in the open lobby. She didn't look up, didn't know who I was, and that felt right. Her concentration reminded me of the boy I used to be, curious, focused, unaware of how much of life could shatter before it made sense. I didn't interrupt her. Some work doesn't need permission. Emma sent a final letter this spring. It was short. No excuses. No questions. You were right. I wasn't ready to be loved that deeply. I folded the note, placed it in the drawer where I keep reminders of things I've survived. Not to revisit, just to remember how far I've come. There was a time I'd have needed that letter to mean something. Now, it was just another sentence in a story I'd long since stopped telling myself. Ryan? I haven't heard his name in a year. I don't know if he's changed. Don't care, either. The truth is, not everyone who hurts you is meant to be confronted. Some people are only meant to be outgrown. I no longer check over my shoulder. No longer track his name in search results. I've reclaimed my time, and with it, my peace. Jordan, Claire's daughter, graduated in May. She invited me. I didn't go, but I sent her a note. You don't need to be defined by what broke you. You get to define what you build next. She wrote back, I already am. I turned 43 last month. I didn't celebrate with a big party. Ava and I spent the day walking through the park that now borders our design project. A place that used to be a trash lot. Now it's green space with benches, murals, trees planted by local kids. We watched two children chase each other around a newly installed sculpture, one that a student of mine had designed from reclaimed steel. What do you see when you look at that? Ava asked, pointing toward the twisted metal reshaped into curves and arches. A mess turned into something useful, I said. She smiled. That's you know. I laughed quietly. That's all of us. If we're lucky. I still teach once a week. Still write notes on student work in the margins instead of headlines. Still ask more questions than I give answers. One of my students recently asked, how do you know when your story is done? I looked at her, then said, it's never done. But you'll know when it's no longer about survival. That's when it's yours again. I'm not angry anymore. Not hiding. Not proving. Not bracing for a return fire that will never come. My story started with betrayal. But it ends, not with victory, not even with forgiveness, but with forward motion. That's what no one tells you about healing. It doesn't arrive with noise. It shows up quietly, as the life you almost didn't believe you deserved, until you chose to build it anyway.